The grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight, its deep, resonant chimes echoing through the empty corridors of my ancestral home. I sat bolt upright in bed, a cold sweat beating on my forehead. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The air felt thick, almost viscous, as if reality itself was warping around me. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, twisting and writhing in ways that defied natural laws. I blinked hard, trying to clear my sight, but the unsettling movements persisted. "Get a grip, Thomas," I muttered to myself, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness of the night. I made my way to the window, drawn by an inexplicable urge to look outside. The full moon hung low and bloated in the sky, casting an eerie silver light over the overgrown gardens. And there, standing motionless among the gnarled trees, was a figure. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs elongated and distorted. It wore a tattered black cloak that seemed to merge with the shadows around it. But it was the face, or rather the lack of one, that sent ice-cold tendrils of fear snaking down my spine. Where a face should have been, there was only a swirling vortex of darkness. As if sensing my gaze, the figure's head snapped up, that featureless void turning in my direction. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "This isn't real," I whispered, squeezing my eyes shut. "It's just a dream. It has to be a dream." But when I opened my eyes, the figure was gone. In its place was a symbol burned into the grass. A crescent moon intersected by a straight line. The symbol of the Nightkeeper. My family's ancient enemy had returned, and with it, a centuries-old curse that I thought had been nothing more than a bedtime story. As I stared at that ominous mark, I knew with dreadful certainty that my life would never be the same. The shadow of the Nightkeeper had fallen over me, and the nightmare was only beginning. Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. I paced the creaking floorboards of my room, jumping at every shadow, every whisper of wind against the window pane. As the first pale fingers of dawn crept across the sky, I made my way down to the library, determined to find answers. The family library was a cavernous room, filled with towering shelves that groaned under the weight of centuries-old tomes. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight that filtered through the grimy windows. I ran my fingers along the spines of leather-bound books, searching for one in particular. "Where are you?" I muttered, frustration mounting. And then, as if responding to my voice, a book fell from a high shelf, landing at my feet with a dull thud. I bent to pick it up, my hands trembling as I read the faded gold lettering on the cover. The Curse of the Nightkeeper. A true account. Settling into a worn armchair, I began to read. The book, written by my great-great-grandfather, told a chilling tale. In the 17th century, our family had been locked in a bitter feud with a powerful warlock known as the Nightkeeper. The conflict culminated in a terrible battle, during which my ancestor managed to banish the Nightkeeper to a realm of shadows. But the victory came at a price. With his dying breath, the Nightkeeper had cursed our bloodline. Every 100 years, he would return seeking vengeance. And if he succeeded in claiming the life of the family's heir, he would be free to wreak havoc upon the world once more. My blood ran cold as I realized the implications. I was the last of my line, and it had been exactly 100 years since the Nightkeeper's last appearance. A sudden gust of wind extinguished the candles in the library, plunging me into darkness. The temperature dropped rapidly, my breath misting in the air before me. And then, I heard it, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Thomas Blackwood." The voice hissed, my name elongated into a sinister caress. "At last, we meet." I leapt from the chair, the book clattering to the floor. The shadows in the corners of the room began to coalesce, taking on that same elongated, distorted shape I had seen in the garden. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. I grabbed a heavy candlestick from a nearby table, brandishing it like a weapon. The Nightkeeper's laughter echoed through the room, a sound like breaking glass and screaming wind. Your fear is delicious, little Blackwood, but it won't save you. Nothing can save you now. The figure lunged forward, shadowy tendrils reaching for me. I swung the candlestick wildly, feeling it pass through the Nightkeeper's form as if it were smoke. Panic overwhelming me, I turned and ran, bursting out of the library and into the hall. Behind me, I could hear the Nightkeeper's pursuit, a sound like 1,000 whispers growing ever closer. I raced through the house, taking turns at random, desperate to escape. Finally, I found myself in the entrance hall. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, and as it touched the shadows chasing me, they recoiled with a hiss of pain. I sagged against the door, gasping for breath. The Nightkeeper's voice drifted to me one last time before the shadows retreated entirely. Enjoy the sunlight while you can, Thomas. When night falls, you will be mine. As silence settled over the house once more, I realized with growing dread that I had until sunset to find a way to break the curse, or I would become another victim of the shadow of the Nightkeeper. The grandfather clock in the hall struck noon, each chime a grim reminder of the dwindling time I had left. I sat at the massive oak desk in my father's old study, surrounded by a chaotic spread of ancient texts and crumbling scrolls. My eyes burned from hours of reading, and my hand cramped around a fountain pen as I scribbled notes. So far, I had found frustratingly little about how to break the curse. Most of the accounts focused on the Nightkeeper's terrible power or the gruesome fates of my ancestors who had fallen victim to it. But I couldn't give up. My life, and potentially the safety of the entire world, depended on finding a solution. A soft knock at the door made me jump. "Come in," I called, my voice hoarse from disuse. Mrs. Hartley, our elderly housekeeper, entered with a tray of sandwiches and tea. Her kind face was creased with concern. "You need to eat something, Mr. Thomas," she said, setting the tray down. "You'll do yourself no good if you collapse from hunger." I managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartley. I don't know what I'd do without you." As she turned to leave, a thought struck me. "Mrs. Hartley, wait. You've been with the family for years. Did my father ever mention anything about the curse?" She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. "It wasn't my place to pry into family matters, sir. Please," I begged. "Anything you know could help." Mrs. Hartley sighed, her shoulders sagging. "Your father, he spent many nights in this very room, poring over these same books. He was terrified that he wouldn't be able to protect you when the time came." Her eyes grew distant with memory. "The night before he died, he told me that the key to breaking the curse lay in embracing the shadow." I never understood what he meant. My mind raced. "Embracing the shadow," I repeated. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartley. That might be exactly what I needed to hear." After she left, I attacked the books with renewed vigor. Embracing the shadow. What could it mean? As I flipped through a particularly ancient tome, a loose page fluttered to the floor. I bent to retrieve it and froze. It was a detailed illustration of the symbol I had seen burned into the grass, the crescent moon intersected by a line. Beneath it was a caption in faded ink, "The sigil of shadow's embrace." My heart pounding, I read the accompanying text. It spoke of a ritual that could be performed at the moment of sunset, when day and night were perfectly balanced. By willingly stepping into the Nightkeeper's shadow while bearing the sigil, one could theoretically enter the shadow realm and confront the entity on its own turf. It was insane, suicidal even, but as I watched the sun's path across the sky from the study window, I realized it might be my only chance. With trembling hands, I began to gather the components listed for the ritual: black candles, salt, a silver knife, and most crucially, my own blood to draw the sigil. As I worked, a chill settled over the room. From the corners of my eyes, I could see shadows beginning to lengthen and twist unnaturally. The Nightkeeper was growing stronger as evening approached. "I'm not finished yet," I growled, as much to myself as to the encroaching darkness. "You won't take me without a fight." The shadows seemed to pulse in response, and I could have sworn I heard that chilling laugh again. But I forced myself to focus on the task at hand. My life depended on getting this ritual right. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, I made my way to the garden where I had first seen the Nightkeeper. The overgrown plants seemed to reach for me with gnarled branches, and every rustle of leaves made me flinch. I laid out the ritual components with shaking hands, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This was it. My last stand against an ancient evil that had haunted my family for generations. As I raised the silver knife to my palm, preparing to draw the sigil in my own blood, a cold wind whipped around me. The shadows stretched and merged, forming the terrifying figure of the Nightkeeper. "Foolish child," it hissed, looming over me. "Do you really think you can defeat me?" I met its featureless void of a face with as much defiance as I could muster. "I guess we're about to find out." The sun touched the horizon. It was time. The silver knife bit into my palm, and I winced as I traced the sigil on the ground with my blood. The Nightkeeper's laughter echoed around me, a cacophony of malevolent glee. "Your ancestors tried similar tricks," it taunted. "They all failed. What makes you think you'll be any different?" I didn't respond, focusing all my energy on completing the ritual. As I placed the last black candle, the sun dipped below the horizon. The moment was now. "I embrace the shadow," I whispered, stepping onto the bloody sigil. The world twisted and warped around me. I felt as if I was being pulled apart and compressed at the same time. Darkness engulfed me, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I had made a terrible mistake. Then suddenly, everything stopped. I found myself in a realm of perpetual twilight. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, and wisps of shadow drifted through the air like smoke. The ground beneath my feet felt insubstantial, as if I might fall through at any moment. "Welcome to my domain, Thomas Blackwood." I spun around to face the Nightkeeper. Here, in this shadow realm, it appeared even more monstrous. Its cloak writhed with a life of its own, and I could see hints of a skeletal form beneath. "You're braver than I gave you credit for," it said, circling me slowly. "But bravery alone won't save you." I stood my ground, though every instinct screamed at me to run. "I'm here to end this once and for all." The Nightkeeper's laughter shook the very fabric of this strange reality. "End it? Oh, you poor, deluded child. This is only the beginning." It lunged at me, shadow tendrils lashing out like whips. I dodged, feeling them whistle past my face. But I couldn't keep dodging forever. I needed a plan. As I frantically looked around for anything that might help, I noticed something strange. Wherever I stepped, the insubstantial ground seemed to solidify slightly. An idea began to form in my mind. "You're right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is the beginning of the end for you." I focused all my will on the ground beneath my feet, imagining it becoming solid, real. To my amazement, it worked. A small circle of firm earth formed around me. The Nightkeeper hesitated, confusion evident in its posture. "What are you doing?" "Embracing the shadow," I replied, "but on my terms." With each step I took, I expanded the circle of reality. The Nightkeeper retreated, hissing in anger, and... was that fear? "This is my realm," it shrieked. "You have no power here." But I did have power. I realized that by willingly entering this place, by embracing the shadow instead of fighting it, I had gained a measure of control. "This ends now," I said, my voice growing stronger. "No more curse. No more victims. You're done." I charged forward, the solidifying ground spreading out from my feet like a wave. The Nightkeeper howled, lashing out with its shadow tendrils, but they dissipated where they touched the areas I had made real. As I reached the entity, I grabbed its cloak with both hands. It felt cold and insubstantial, but I held on with all my might. "I banish you," I growled, "back to the darkness where you belong." The world around us began to shake and fracture. The Nightkeeper's form started to disintegrate, breaking apart like smoke in the wind. Its final scream of rage echoed through the collapsing realm as everything faded to white. I awoke with a gasp, finding myself lying on the dew-covered grass of the garden. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant golds and pinks. For a moment, I lay there, afraid to move. Had it worked? Or was this just a cruel trick of the Nightkeeper? Slowly, I sat up, looking around. The garden appeared normal. No twisted shadows, no ominous figures. Even the oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the estate was gone, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. As I got to my feet, I noticed something on the ground where I had lain. The sigil I had drawn in blood was still there, but it had changed. The line intersecting the crescent moon had vanished, leaving only the moon itself. As I watched, even that faded away, leaving only unmarked earth. "Mr. Thomas," Mrs. Hartley's voice called out. She was hurrying across the lawn towards me, her face a mixture of relief and concern. "Are you all right? You've been out here all night." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I'm fine, Mrs. Hartley. Better than fine, actually. I think it's finally over." She looked at me quizzically but didn't press for details. Instead, she simply nodded and said, "Well, then, let's get you inside for some breakfast. You look like you could use a good meal." As we walked back to the house, I took one last look at the garden. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of movement in the shadows under a gnarled old tree. But then I blinked, and it was gone. The curse was broken, I was sure of it. But as I stepped into the warmth and light of my ancestral home, I made a silent vow. I would remain vigilant, ready to face whatever darkness might threaten in the future. After all, I was a Blackwood, and Blackwoods had been keeping the night at bay for generations. It was my legacy, my duty, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly ready to embrace it.